The July heat clung to me like a suffocating blanket as I sat on a cracked bench near the bus stop. The pavement shimmered in waves, and the air felt thick enough to choke on. 3 nights without a roof had left me hollow. My bag, the last remnant of my former life, sat at my feet, stuffed with a few clothes and the bare essentials. It was strange to think that just a year ago I was a nurse at a private clinic in New Haven, respected, with a small apartment of my own. Now I was simply Anna Whitaker, 30 years old, without a home, without a father, and without a future. I pulled a small mirror from my bag and studied the reflection that looked back. The same brown eyes, the same strong lines of my face, but dulled now by exhaustion and the bruising shadows under my eyes. I used to look confident in my nurse's uniform. I used to smile easily. Now, even my smile felt foreign, like it belonged to someone I no longer was. My thoughts dragged me backward to the day everything started unraveling. The clinic had blamed me for a patient's death, a mistake that wasn't mine. They needed a scapegoat, and I was convenient. Court battles drained my savings. My reputation was destroyed. Then came the cruelest blow, my father falling ill. I sold our apartment to pay for his treatments, clinging to hope, but the treatments failed. Watching him waste away, watching the strength leave the man who had raised me alone, it broke something deep inside me. And when he finally passed, the silence left behind was unbearable. Yet he hadn't left me empty-handed. In his final days, he'd written a letter, not to me, but to someone I had only heard about in fragments of stories, his school friend, Richard Thompson. They had grown up together, but life had pulled them apart. My father was always too proud to ask for help, but as death closed in, he set that pride aside. He asked Richard to look after me, to not let me be lost in the world with nothing. That letter was folded carefully in my bag now, its paper softened by the countless times I'd held it, read it, and prayed it might change something. I glanced at my watch. 2 o'clock. The meeting was at 3. I still had an hour to gather myself, to pretend I was not broken, to appear as though I had something left to offer. I traced the address written on a scrap of paper. Greenwich, Connecticut. The heart of old wealth, a world I had only glimpsed in passing cars and glossy magazines. It felt impossible that someone like me would step into that world today. But what choice did I have? There was no going back to the clinic, no home to return to, no father waiting with a kind word and warm meal. Just this letter, this one fragile chance, this final tether to something beyond despair. I stood, adjusted the strap of my worn bag on my shoulder, and walked toward the bus that would carry me into the unknown. My father's last words echoed in my mind. Richard will remember me. He will understand. He will help you. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than grief and exhaustion. I felt the faint stirrings of hope, fragile but alive. Today could be the beginning of something different, or the final proof that I truly had nowhere left to turn. The bus ride from the city to Greenwich took nearly 40 minutes, yet it felt like I had crossed into another world. The noise and grit of the streets where I had been surviving seemed to dissolve the farther we went, replaced by manicured hedges, wide lanes shaded by maples, and the kinds of houses I had only ever seen in glossy magazines. By the time I stepped off at the last stop, the afternoon sun was gilding rows of stone walls and wrought iron gates. My shoes crunched against the gravel as I followed the directions scrawled on that slip of paper, each step pulling me deeper into a neighborhood where wealth was woven into every brick and leaf. When I reached the gates of the Thompson estate, I had to pause. The mansion stood behind tall hedges, 3 stories of pale stone and glass, its sweeping lawn dotted with sculptures and rose beds that looked too perfect to be real. A man in a navy uniform stood at the gatehouse, and my throat tightened. I clutched the strap of my worn bag as I approached, my voice barely steady when I told him, "My name is Anna Whitaker. I have a 3 o'clock appointment with Mr. Richard Thompson." The guard checked his tablet, nodded, and pressed a button. The gates swung open, soundlessly. Mr. Thompson is expecting you. Please go ahead. The path was paved in pale stone, leading toward the front doors framed by columns. Every step I took felt heavier, as though the disparity between who I was and where I stood grew sharper. Just days ago, I had been sleeping on a wooden bench in a bus terminal. Now I was walking into the world of a man who could decide my future with a word. A man in a dark suit greeted me at the door, ushering me through a hall lined with oil paintings and marble statues. My breath caught at the sheer expanse of it, the vaulted ceilings, the chandeliers, the polished parquet, floor gleaming under my worn shoes. Mr. Thompson is waiting in his study, the man said, his tone courteous but distant. I was shown into a room paneled with dark wood, where shelves of leather-bound books rose toward the ceiling. Behind a massive desk stood Richard Thompson himself. He was taller than I expected, his hair touched with gray, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Miss Whittaker," he said, stepping forward to shake my hand. "I'm glad you came." I handed him the letter. His gaze lingered on the envelope as if it weighed more than paper and ink. He opened it, read silently, his expression controlled except for a slight tremor at his mouth. When he finally looked up, his voice carried a note of quiet respect. "Your father, he was a proud man. I wish I had known of his illness sooner." I told him everything then. The false accusation at the clinic, the lawsuit that ruined me, the endless hospital visits, the sale of our home, the nights I spent at his bedside begging for a miracle. My words were steady, though each memory cut like glass. He listened without interruption, his fingers pressed together under his chin. When I finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Then he leaned forward. "You trained as a nurse. I may have a place for you here. My father, Charles, suffered a stroke 6 months ago. He's made progress, but he still needs constant care. Our caregiver recently left, and I need someone I can trust." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Work. A room? Stability? The tears that had been burning behind my eyes threatened to spill, but I forced myself to hold steady. "Are you offering me the job?" "Yes," Richard said simply. "Work here, live here, be compensated fairly. My father is difficult, but I believe you can handle him." I drew in a long breath, feeling something I hadn't in weeks. Hope. Fragile, trembling, but real. For the first time since I buried my father, I could imagine that maybe I wasn't at the end of my story. Maybe I had just stepped into its next chapter. I followed the house attendant up the wide staircase, my steps muffled by the thick carpet. The corridor smelled faintly of polish and lavender, and sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden patterns on the walls. He paused outside a set of double doors and knocked gently. From within came a gruff voice, low but firm. "Come in." The study was large, airy, with tall windows that overlooked a garden. By the window sat an elderly man in a high-backed chair, a cane resting against the table beside him. His posture was stiff, his silver hair neatly combed back. But what struck me most were his eyes, sharp, calculating, as if measuring me before I'd even spoken a word. This was Charles Thompson. "So," he said, his voice touched with irony, "you're the one they've sent to keep me alive. Another jailer." I forced a smile and stepped forward. "My name is Anna Whittaker. I'm pleased to meet you, Mr. Thompson." He studied me openly, his gaze traveling from my face down to my shoes. Then, unexpectedly, he gave a short laugh. "At least you're not dull to look at." The last one looked like she'd been pickled too long. From behind me, Richard's voice cut in, calm but firm. "Father enough. Anna is here because she's capable, not for your amusement." Charles only lifted a brow, unconcerned. "We'll see. I've run companies, Anna. I can tell when someone is weak. If you last more than a week, maybe I'll start to believe you're worth the trouble." His words should have stung, but instead I felt a strange steadiness take hold. "I don't intend to be weak," I said simply. For the first time, something like a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Good. We'll get along, then. That evening, I was invited to join them for dinner. The dining room was vast, with a table that could have seated 20, though only 4 places had been set. Richard sat at the head, Charles at his right, and beside him a woman I hadn't yet met. She was tall, with elegant silver hair coiled at her neck, her posture perfectly straight. A string of pearls glimmered at her throat. "This is my aunt, Margaret Thompson," Richard introduced. Margaret's voice carried the lilting resonance of someone who had once commanded an audience. "So, you are Anna. Richard tells me you've had a difficult time. Well, this house can be unforgiving, but I hope you'll find it a place of refuge." Her gaze was steady but not unkind. There was dignity in her every movement, the aura of a woman accustomed to fine theaters and concert halls. I realized with a start that she must be the same Margaret Thompson whose name I had seen once on a faded opera poster in a thrift shop. The meal was formal but not cold. Conversation flowed in measured tones, with Charles occasionally grumbling but never directing his sharpness at me again. Margaret asked about my nursing background, and I answered cautiously, leaving out the humiliation of the clinic. She nodded, as if she understood more than I said. Afterward, the housekeeper, a kindly woman named Mrs. Howard, led me to a guest room in the West Wing. When she opened the door, my throat tightened. The room was spacious, with a soft bed dressed in crisp linen, a window overlooking the garden, and even a small adjoining bath. To anyone else, it might have seemed ordinary. To me, after 3 nights on a station bench, it was salvation. As I sat on the edge of the bed, the exhaustion of the past weeks pressed down on me. But for the first time, I allowed myself to believe I might have a place again. Not just as a guest, but as a person who belonged. I was exploring the house one quiet afternoon, tracing my fingers along the shelves of Charles's study, when my eyes landed on a silver frame placed deliberately on his desk. It was a portrait of a young woman, her features delicate yet striking, her gaze carrying that mix of innocence and quiet defiance only the truly alive can hold. Beneath the frame was a nameplate, polished to perfection, Catherine Thompson. My breath caught. The name echoed through me, colliding with memories I had long buried. Catherine, Katie, Richard's daughter, the girl whose tragic death in a car accident was spoken of in hushed tones, always with a veil of grief. Everyone said she had been taken too young, and Charles, her godfather, had never quite recovered from the loss. But it wasn't just the name that rattled me. It was the face. I leaned closer, my pulse hammering. I knew those eyes. I knew the curve of that jawline, the subtle tilt of her lips. They belonged not only to Catherine Thompson, but to a patient I had once tended to in the dim corridors of the state psychiatric hospital. Her name had been Yevdokia, though she barely answered when spoken to. Her hair was disheveled, her voice fractured, her eyes haunted. Yet beneath the layers of neglect and madness, I had recognized beauty, a spark of something broken but not extinguished. The resemblance was undeniable. I remember pausing, back then, thinking she looked out of place in that sterile, gray institution, like a bird with clipped wings shoved into a rusting cage. And now, staring at Catherine's portrait in Charles's home, my memory refused to dismiss the possibility. They were the same. They had to be. A cold chill swept through me, though the study was warm, the fire in the hearth still crackling from the morning. Could it be that Catherine hadn't died at all? That the accident was a lie? A story woven tightly enough to conceal a truth too dangerous to speak? But if she lived, why was she locked away in that asylum under another name? Who had placed her there, and what were they protecting or hiding? I sank into Charles's armchair, the weight of it pressing down on me. This wasn't idle curiosity. It was a thread of fate tugging at my hands, daring me to unravel it. I thought of the nights I had spent at the hospital, the cries of patients echoing through the halls, Yevdokia's hollow eyes meeting mine through the bars of her world. What if she had tried to tell me something then, in her fractured murmurs? What if I had missed the chance to save her? The photograph stared back at me, as if accusing me of complicity. I knew in that moment I could not let it go. Richard's daughter might still be alive, hidden in plain sight, silenced by those who should have protected her. The thought was unbearable, and yet it filled me with a grim determination. I closed the study door softly behind me, my heart pounding with a secret I dared not yet share. Somewhere out there, beyond the walls of this mansion, Catherine's shadow lingered, and I was going to follow it no matter where it led. I couldn't sleep that night. The photo of Catherine Thompson haunted me. The same soft jawline, the same eyes that once looked at me blankly from the window of the psychiatric ward. My pulse refused to steady. If Katie had really died in that car crash years ago, then who had I spoken to at the hospital? Who was Yevdokia? At dawn, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the glow of the screen casting pale shadows across the room. I searched everything I could about the accident. Headlines popped up. Tragic fire claims young woman's life. Richard Thompson's daughter dies in car blaze. I clicked through article after article, but the details gnawed at me. The body had been burned beyond recognition, the report said. They relied on dental records to confirm the identity. No witnesses, no photos, just fragments of charred metal and smoke. Something about it felt too convenient. I leaned back, rubbing my temples, and memory snapped like a whip. Yevdokia's trembling hands, the thin scar on her left wrist running from palm to forearm. At the time, I assumed it was from self-harm or an accident. But as I scrolled through old pictures of Catherine online, one image made my breath hitch. A candid photo from her college years. Her sleeve had slipped up, revealing the faint outline of a scar in the exact same place. My stomach clenched. This wasn't a coincidence. Driven by a cold urgency, I called the psychiatric hospital where I once worked. The receptionist recognized my name. I'd been on staff during Yevdokia's stay. I asked carefully at first about the patient records. Most files, she told me, were confidential. But when I pressed, saying it was for medical research, she hesitated, then lowered her voice. "She's no longer here," the woman said. "She was discharged a few months after you left." Discharged? By whom? My knuckles whitened around the phone. "A guardian," she whispered. "A man. Signed all the papers. Very well connected. His name was Alex Griffin." The air left my lungs in a sharp, unsteady exhale. Alex Griffin, the polished partner of Richard Thompson, the man who smiled like a politician and moved money like a magician. Of course it was him. He wasn't just Richard's associate, he was his shield, his fixer. I hung up and sat in silence, staring at the wall. 1,000 fragments locked together in my mind. Katie hadn't burned to death in that car. She had been hidden, renamed, buried alive in another kind of prison. And Alex Griffin had made it happen. The weight of it pressed into my chest. For years, people had pitted Richard's loss, admiring his strength in the face of tragedy. Meanwhile, the truth was rotting under their feet. My hands trembled as I whispered to myself, "She's alive, she has to be alive." The suspicion I carried had transformed into conviction. The shadows of the Thompson family stretched further than I imagined, and now I was entangled in them. One thing was certain, I couldn't walk away anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this family's history was far from what they let on. Every polite smile at dinner, every carefully measured word, it all seemed rehearsed, like a play that had been staged too many times. And the more I listened, the more I noticed the cracks. Charles avoided any mention of Catherine, Richard's late daughter, like the topic itself was cursed. But I had seen her face, those photographs in his study. And I had seen that same face before in a psychiatric hospital, staring at me with haunted eyes under a different name, Yevdokia. That alone was enough to keep me awake at night. But there were other threads, and I began tugging at them one by one. Richard's business partners, Alex Griffin and Anthony Myers, were names I kept hearing in passing. Their relationship with the family seemed cordial now, but the records told another story. I spent hours combing through public filings, old news clippings, and even forgotten corners of the company's archives. What emerged was a picture of greed and resentment. Griffin and Myers had once been Catherine's strongest allies, yet disputes over money, stock options, and missing funds had turned their alliance bitter. Still, bitterness alone didn't explain why a young woman had vanished. It wasn't until I ventured into Catherine's old room that the pieces began to shift into place. The room had been left almost untouched, a shrine of sorts, her favorite books neatly stacked, perfume bottles gathering dust, a faded scarf draped across the chair as if she had left in a hurry and would return any moment. I don't know what pulled me to check the desk, but when I slid open the drawer, my hand brushed against a worn leather notebook. Its pages were fragile, edges frayed, the ink smudged in places as if she had written in haste or with fear pressing down on her. I sat on the floor and began to read. Her handwriting was sharp, almost impatient, but her words struck like a blade. I know what they're doing. The contracts are forged. They think Father won't notice. But he trusts me more than anyone. I'll tell him soon. He deserves to know. I flipped to another page, my pulse racing. I confronted Alex today. He brushed me off, but I could see the panic in his eyes. Anthony pretends nothing's wrong, but I heard them whispering in the study. They'll ruin everything if I don't stop them. The entries grew more frantic as I turned the pages, the writing messier more hurried. And then, abruptly, they stopped. No conclusion, no explanation, just silence after her last words. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. I sat frozen, the diary heavy in my hands. This wasn't speculation anymore, wasn't some shadowy suspicion. Catherine hadn't been blind, naive, or careless. She had known the truth, known about the fraud, the betrayal, the rot beneath her father's empire. She had tried to act, and then, right when she was about to expose everything, she disappeared. The air in that room seemed to grow colder. The silence pressed down like a weight. For the first time, I felt it clearly. This family wasn't haunted by grief. They were haunted by guilt. And I couldn't help but wonder, if Catherine had been silenced, how far would they go to silence me? That evening, the mansion no longer felt like the safe haven it once was. The echo of footsteps across the marble hall made me tense. 2 unfamiliar cars pulled up outside, their engines cutting through the quiet like a warning bell. I peeked from behind the heavy curtains and saw them, Alex Griffin and Anthony Myers. Their presence here was no accident. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. I had seen them before, in the sterile corridors of the psychiatric clinic, their sharp voices carrying threats cloaked as negotiations. The memory of that encounter still haunted me, and now here they were, stepping confidently into the Whitmore estate as though they owned it. I slipped deeper into the shadowed corner of the hall, praying they wouldn't catch a glimpse of me. If they recognized me, if they remembered my face from that day, I knew the questions would come. And questions from men like them were not meant to be answered. From a distance, I watched as Richard greeted them in the grand drawing room. His tone was steady, almost cordial, but I caught the stiffness in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed nervously against his glass. They weren't friends. They were sharks circling, waiting for weakness. I pressed my back against the wall, straining to hear. Their voices carried low and deliberate, every word dripping with implication. They spoke of deals left unfinished, numbers that didn't add up, and Catherine, always Catherine. Her name hung in the air like a ghost neither of them wanted to acknowledge, yet couldn't escape. Then Richard's voice, quieter, weighed down with something heavier than business. She told me once, before she disappeared, said she had stumbled on some unusual documents, contracts that didn't make sense. She wanted me to see them. The words slammed into me like a blow. My pulse quickened. That matched exactly what I had read in Catherine's journal just hours earlier. The frantic scrawls, her fear of being watched, the confession that she had discovered financial fraud buried deep in her father's company's partnerships. And now here was Richard, unknowingly confirming every word. I gripped the edge of the stairwell, my knuckles white. The pieces were aligning in a way that chilled me. Catherine had been on the brink of exposing them. She had intended to confront her father, to bring the truth to light. But before she could, she vanished. Griffin leaned forward, his voice sharp but controlled. "Richard, the past is best left buried." She was impulsive. "Don't let old stories cloud the future we're building here." Myers said nothing, but the way his eyes narrowed told me enough. There was knowledge there, knowledge and guilt hidden behind a polished mask. I remained silent in the dark, heart hammering. I couldn't let them know I was listening. I couldn't let them know I understood. But the truth was clear. Whatever happened to Catherine was no accident. These men, these partners, were tied to her disappearance. And now, whether they realized it or not, I was tied to it too. The mansion's silence felt suffocating once they left, the air heavy with secrets. But I knew one thing with certainty. Catherine hadn't been paranoid. She had been right. And the danger she feared was closer than ever. I knew I couldn't do this alone. The names Griffin and Myers weren't just whispers in Katie's journal anymore. They had walked through the doors of the Whitaker estate themselves. If they were bold enough to show up here, then I had no doubt their claws were sunk deep into whatever darkness Katie had stumbled across. And if I was going to fight them, I needed an ally. That's when Marina came to mind. She and I had worked together years ago, back at the city hospital. Marina wasn't just a nurse with quick hands. She was sharp, resourceful, and had a memory like a steel trap. If anyone could help me find the missing pieces, it was her. I dialed her number with trembling fingers, praying she'd even remember me after all this time. "Anna." Her voice was surprised but warm. "It's been forever. How are you?" I didn't waste time with small talk. "Marina, I need your help. And it has to stay between us." I took a deep breath before continuing. "Do you remember a patient named Yevdokia? Admitted maybe 6 months ago? There should be a file. I need access to it." There was a pause on the other end. I could picture her, brows furrowed, turning the name over in her head. Finally she said, "I do remember her. Quiet woman, terminal case, right? Why do you need her records?" "Because I think they're connected to Katie's death." I whispered, my throat tight. "I can't explain everything over the phone. Just can you look? Can you find it for me?" Marina didn't answer right away, and I thought I'd asked too much. Then she said firmly, "I'll see what I can do. But Anna, if I get caught, I could lose my license. You know that." "I know," I said softly. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't life or death." A long exhale came through the line, and then, "All right, I'll dig into the archives. I'll call you when I have something. But Anna, be careful. If this ties back to Griffin and Myers, you're playing with fire." Her words lingered long after I hung up. She was right. I was already in too deep, but pulling out wasn't an option anymore. That night, as the wind howled around the estate and the walls seemed to creak with secrets, I began sketching out a plan. It wasn't enough just to know that Griffin and Myers were involved. I had to expose them. If Katie had died trying to reveal the truth, then someone had to finish what she started. Step 1. Wait for Marina's call. If Yevdokia's medical records showed irregularities, falsified signatures, or unexplained treatments, it would be my first thread of evidence. Step 2. Track down Katie's trail. Somewhere out there, hidden beneath the lies, was proof that she hadn't simply vanished into the grave they claimed she was in. Step 3. Prepare myself for the storm. Because going after Griffin and Myers wasn't just about paperwork or whispers in journals. These men didn't operate in half measures. They were dangerous, and now I was standing in their shadow. I closed Katie's journal and pressed my palm against the worn leather cover. Her words had led me this far. Now it was my turn to act. The pieces were moving, and I had just chosen my side. And though my chest was tight with fear, a spark of resolve burned brighter than ever. Whatever lay ahead, I wasn't going back down. I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls around me were shrinking. Griffin and Myers were showing up at the house more often, strutting through the halls as if they owned them. They never said much to me directly, but the way their eyes lingered, cold, watchful, sent a chill down my spine every time. Their presence wasn't casual. It was deliberate, a silent reminder that I was stepping into territory where I didn't belong. One evening, Charles closed the study door behind him and leaned heavily against the desk. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "There's something you need to know about Katie," he said, his gaze fixed on the fire. My heart skipped. She argued with Griffin the week before the crash. It wasn't a small fight. She accused him of pushing her into a deal she didn't want. She threatened to walk away from the contract entirely. I felt my breath catch. And then the accident happened. He nodded slowly, his expression grim. Griffin claimed it was a misunderstanding, but Katie wouldn't have driven on that road, not in the middle of the night. She hated that stretch. Too narrow, too many blind curves. She avoided it unless she had no choice. The implication hit me like a blow. I had been dancing around the idea, but hearing Charles say it out loud made it real. Katie's accident might not have been an accident at all. After that conversation, I started noticing things I had brushed off before. A car idling at the end of the driveway longer than it should. Footsteps echoing on the porch when no one came to the door. The faint sense that eyes were on me even when I was alone in the kitchen, the blinds half drawn. At night, I lay awake listening to every creak of the old house, every shift of wind against the shutters. My rational mind told me I was being paranoid, but instinct whispered otherwise. Paranoia didn't explain the shadow I caught in the reflection of the living room window. It didn't explain the way Griffin's smile lingered too long, sharp at the edges when our eyes met. Marina had promised to get me the files. I clung to that hope like a lifeline. But hope came with risk. If Griffin and Myers discovered what I was doing, I wouldn't just be putting myself in danger. I'd be dragging Charles into it too. One afternoon, while walking through the garden, I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. I turned, but no one was there. My pulse hammered in my ears. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I wasn't just imagining it. Someone was watching. And for the first time since this all began, the fear was no longer distant. It was here, in the air I breathed, tightening around me like a noose. The more I read, the more I realized Catherine had left breadcrumbs, small, careful notes that now painted a much darker picture. The diary pages were fragile under my fingertips, the ink faint but still sharp enough to pierce through decades of silence. She had written about meetings with Griffin and Myers, about contracts that were supposed to benefit the family but instead bled the estate dry. The entries mirrored everything Charles had confessed to me, down to the very day Catherine had argued with Griffin before the accident. The alignment between their stories was too precise to be coincidence. One passage made my stomach twist. If I push harder, they will make me disappear. I know what they are capable of. I stared at the line until the words blurred. She had known. Catherine hadn't been naive. She had been cornered, isolated, and silenced. I closed the diary and pressed it against my chest, fighting the shiver crawling up my spine. My instincts screamed louder than ever. I wasn't just digging into the past anymore. I was stepping onto the same path Catherine had walked, and I could feel the walls closing in. Every glance over my shoulder, every flicker of a car parked too long on the street, every creak outside my window felt like a warning. And yet I couldn't stop. I started organizing the evidence, pages copied, photographs cataloged, Charles's testimony written down. Each detail built a scaffolding of truth, but I knew scaffolding could collapse if I wasn't careful. The more I pieced together, the clearer it became. Griffin and Myers had orchestrated not just financial ruin, but lives broken to keep their grip intact. Catherine had stood against them, and it had cost her everything. I whispered to myself, I won't let it end the same way. Still, the sense of time running out pressed on me. Nights felt shorter. My heartbeat never slowed. Even the simplest tasks, checking the mail, walking down the driveway, became exercises in paranoia. I caught shadows moving where no one should be. Once, I swore I heard footsteps behind me, only to turn and find empty air. But I trusted my intuition, and it told me the storm was almost here. I locked the diary away, but the words clung to me like smoke. The truth was no longer just about Catherine or the Thompson estate. It was about survival. I had uncovered enough to shake the foundation of Griffin and Myers, and they would know it. Sitting at the desk late one night, I wrote one final line in my notebook. There's no turning back. I didn't know what the next day would bring, only that the collision was inevitable. The evidence, the danger, the legacy, it was all converging. Somewhere out there, in the dark, the same forces that had silenced Catherine were waiting for me. And yet, instead of fear, a strange calm settled in. The pieces were aligning, and destiny was moving forward. I felt it in my bones. The truth was about to erupt, and when it did, the fate of the Thompson family and my own life would be forever altered.